museums as polyphonic spaces. And because of this program and because of their support, we have this kind of planning, and if you have any friends that is interested in the topic, then please share this link with your friends who would also like to learn about this topic in English. So let me give you a little introduction about our speaker today, Mr. Ling Tsung-kuei. He has cooperated with us for a long time regarding the International Docent Training Program. There are a lot of literary experts in Taipei. When we have started promoting this program since the 2017, all these experts have helped us to organize the structure of this program and to connect all the important cultural assets of the walled city of Qing Dynasty into a sightseeing route. So now what we have been doing is we have been organizing the monthly Blast to the Past walking tour of Old Taipei. So people at home and abroad can learn about the development of the city through architecture and historical site. And today we are very honored to invite one of the experts, Mr. Ling Tsung-kuei, to walk us through the history of Taipei's development through architectural, spatial, and historical images, so that no matter the audience at home and abroad, we can piece together the urban memory puzzle and discover our relationship with the city and reconnect with our hometown. A lot of people say that their parents may be from different countries. For example, their mom is from Taiwan, but their dad is maybe from another country. So we have a lot of international docents that actually understand the Taiwan culture more than local Taiwanese people. So we are again very thankful to have Mr. Lin Tsung-kuei join us today and going to share with us and help us piece together the urban memory puzzle. So let's give him a warm welcome. Good morning, everyone. So if I am speaking too soft, please let me know and I will start my presentation today. This is a 1985 image when during the Japanese colonial era, when the Japanese architects came to measure the land of the in Taiwan when they first arrived. Actually, this floor plan is a little bit different from how we are used to it. So when just imagine, turn it to an angle of 90 degrees and maybe you see it more clearly. So when the Japanese people first arrived in Taiwan, actually the villages in Taiwan are not very complete. It's scattered everywhere, and we can see the black part is manga. One, so the now Wanhua is this in this dark area. It's in the Qianlong era of the Qing Dynasty, and uh, so this is about the 18th century, about 1890, after the 1890s. So there are a divide between these different people that originate from different ethnic groups. And now we can see moving to the left is what we have now, 大稻埕. And then before the Qing dynasty was overthrown, they decided to build this walled city. So you can see that this rectangular area, this is the walled city before the walls are demolished. So it is like organizing a new city. But just when it started organizing, the Qing dynasty was overthrown and the Japanese government took over. So we start to enter the stage of the Japanese colonial era. Okay, so this is maybe more familiar to you. This is how we used to draw the floor plan. You can see that this is during the colonial era, Japanese colonial era. You can see the village density is closer because the population is becoming more and more dense. And the first thing they did was to demolish the walls so that these different roads and streets can be connected and they can start to organize and plan the city in an overall way so they can connect all the different routes. So in Dadaocheng, the population was very dense. And you can see that over here in the north, it is less populated during the Qing dynasty, and most of the buildings are like temples. So because this is not very dense, so when the Japanese government moved to Taiwan, they actually lived in this area because it's a bit remote from all the other civilians. Uh, this is because that even though they started living here, they still have a psychological boundary. So they still differentiate from themselves from the local people. And also, there were a lot of problems like the water flooding, etc. So they have to handle these issues first. So they started to develop eastwards first. This map was drawn in 1932 when the urban development is proceeded to completed about two-third of the organization, and the population has rise to 600,000 in Taiwan. So we can see that the floor is a natural territory here. And you can see that after 13 years of the urban organization, the Japanese era was over. So we can see that actually this walled area, it didn't really do a lot of revolutionary change. So we can see in the west area, there is not a lot of difference from what it was like before. So we can see that it's from the west, the streams to the mountains in the south side. We can see that the red part is the main road. For example, what is now Xingyi Road, Ren'ai Road, and Heping Road, Mingquan Road. All these roads are already the main roads during 1932, but actually it was not activated. It was just a plan. But these vertical roads and horizontal main roads has already been organized during this time. Of course, the name has been changed. It will be different now, but the road is still the same. So this was the Japanese government's plan is to develop towards the east and to develop these main roads. But then after the Japanese colonial era was over, there was a huge population raise because a lot of people from mainland China has moved and relocated to Taiwan. This was drawn in 1945 by the U.S. Army when they were during the World War II of the air bombing during that time. They did a very detailed measurement on the different buildings, and they have a very detailed understanding of the distance between different buildings. So this is actually a very detailed and very exquisite measurements because it is related with the war, and for air bombing you have to be very accurate. So they need to know where each specific location is so they can organize and command their orders. So we can still see we are still in the 1915 era, and we can see that after 50 years, a lot of boundaries has been gone.
So it was connected from Mongjia to Dadaocheng. In most of the village, there were a lot of houses built. So you can see the light brown area. There was no many houses. But as you went from Songjiang Road and Xingshen Road to the east, actually you can see there was not so densely populated because the farmland wasn't developed, and you could see there's characteristics because from the west you can see the name of the roads as city, another character coming from Japanese. So besides Ximen Tang, the word is named Ding in Chinese, which comes from the Japanese characters. So that means a little village, a little town in this area. So this is how Japanese government colonized this area. And in Songshan area, there is also another word for village named Zhuang. So we just saw the maps, then we are coming to the architecture. So there are different styles of architecture and spaces, so we can see the 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 development of Taipei City. So you can see the Taipei City wall from outside. And outside of this picture, if you can look at the scene from the right, this is the borderline of northern and western gates of the walled city of Taipei. And there is a corner, there's a little tower for warehousing some weapons or for soldiers' rest. And also, you could see that the height of the wall is quite low, because at that time when they built the defense, they would like to defend the enemies, but in the late 19th centuries, there were more high-tech and advanced weapons, so they do not have to build that high defense walls. But as Taipei is also a place for defense, so they need to build this kind of bricks wall. And in Qing Dynasty, they still need to build a defense wall, and because the law didn't what was still wasn't amended, but they still wanted to reflect their defense power, so they built this kind of walled city. And there's two layers defense wall, and when other enemies attacked, this second layer could defend the enemy, and the enemy could not just go straight into the gate. So when there was enemy coming, they could lock them in between the layers to avoid the attacks. So I just explained the standard specification for a defense wall. But in history, it was not until the Japanese colonial era that they used the defense wall as defense purposes. So in the Japanese colonial era, some Taiwanese people were protesting against the Japanese government. So when the Governor General office came and settled in Taipei, they used this defense wall to fight back the protests of the Taiwanese people. So when Kodama Gentaro viceroy came, he faced a huge challenge because Taiwan had a lot of typhoon and earthquakes, and when there was a huge rainfall, the water could not go out of this Taipei basin, and this caused them a big problem because they could not clear off the sediment, and the sanitary conditions and prediction capacities were not as good as we have right now. So you can see that there were a lot of excretes from both human and animals on the streets. So it would cause a big problem in public health. They needed to let the air flow and let the water out. So at first, they were thinking about digging a few holes on the wall. They were wondering if they just dig about 9 holes on each wall. But when they started the operation, they found that there was another more cost-effective method. It was developed by their architect because when they built the wall, they moved the stone from the Beito area to build the wall because the stone was most suitable. So they picked the stone and delivered them to the Taipei Basin. In the past, there was a little island around the Taipei Basin area called Shezi Island. So they have to deliver the stone through a canal and went past the Shezi Island and then to the Taipei city. And now there's a MRT station called Jiannan Road. There was a relics and which showed the huge manpower and delivery system of the stone. So they were just thinking about demolishing the wall because the delivery was too demanding. They found that the stone was really good as a building material, so they just wanted to just rebuild it. So if you can go to the National Taiwan University of Hospital, the wall is actually made of this kind of stone because it is not easy to get the building materials in Taiwan, so they tried to source from the local. And when you go to Xiaonanmen, there's a little white house. The walls were also made of the stone. And you can also find some literature in our archives saying that they were using boards to deliver this stone. So it was just like they dismantle all of the walls and buildings and just rebuild it from zero. And also, if you can go to a jail in Taipei City, the wall was also made of this kind of stone. So when they demolished the defense wall, what would it become? Here comes this picture. So whether it's Taipei, Tainan, Hsinchu, or Kaohsiung, we can always see um, something in common. When speaking of Paris or Berlin, from since middle century, they would demolish some walls and then rebuild it. So they have been through the industrial revolution and they would like to secure their authority. So they have to develop a wide boulevard or road. It would just not give people a sense of visual representation. It could also serve as a road for military parade. So because they have big tanks and some gunpowder and so on, so they need a bigger road for delivering these materials. A very famous example is a wall boulevard in Vienna. You can see many museums or galleries or government buildings are surrounding around the boulevard. And this picture was taken in the intersection of Chongqing Road and Zhongxiao Road. So there was a firefighter station, and if you could stand on the roof, you will have a beautiful view, a beautiful landscape. So there was a road vertical of this area, and there was a 3-story building. It was a railway hotel, and it is now located nearby the Mitsukoshi department store. So in the early stage of Japanese colonial era, they demolished the defense wall, and we were just wondering because there it was less populated and there were not many cars, then why did they build this kind of wide road? Actually, it's just for uh, landscape purposes. It just look beautiful. So it also reflects a new era because they can give this area a new sense of roadmap, and for Han people, they could feel the change of civilization because they didn't see this kind of landscape before, and the Japanese government would like to stress that their value was different from other dynasties or other governments because around uh, around the Meiji Reform era, they just started to rebuild their city road and buildings because they also have been through the industrial revolution and they just want to refurbish all the buildings from the past eras. So you can see that in the past, the defense walls were used to enclose the castle for the king or queen, and it was different from the Chinese style buildings. So the Japanese government colonized Taiwan. They finally got the chance to imitate how European people did for their urban planning. So they just demolished the buildings and defense walls and tried to reorganize the buildings and roads. As you can see from this picture, you can see how different it was in the past. Now, the only building that still exists now is a little tower you can see in the picture beside a high building. So actually, the buildings around this tower disappeared, and they just they were corporations in the Japanese era. They also had a good relationship with the government, and actually, you could see this could serve as the first impression when people exited the Taipei main train station.
So we can see a lot of palm trees on the road. These palm trees are exported. We are a subtropical country, but actually before our soil in the ancient times was not fit for these palm trees. So all these palm trees are imported to Taiwan. So why do they import these kind of palm trees? Just to show that this is one of their colonized countries. So they want everything to they want all of their colonized countries to look very aligned, look very similar. So when they do the landscape plan, they started to plan they started to plant similar trees and plants. So you will see that this kind of organization and planning or landscape design is deliberate. And also here is the university is developed. And you can see that everywhere looks like very similar to National Taiwan University with all the palm trees, rows of palm trees. And this also serves kind of like a lab. If they are able to plant the trees here, then they know they can plant it in other places in Taiwan. So we can see that this is the Zhongshan Hall. Zhongshan Hall is where all the government officers work. We can see that there are three different old halls that are used as the that is used by the Qing dynasty to promote a certain kind of regulations. So we can see that during the old Qing dynasty time, if the central government want to announce a new regulation, or maybe they have to initiate a new action, they will set up a place like this to do all the related official works. So you can see that they used these buildings. They didn't really immediately build new architectures, because we know that it takes a lot of time and money and labor to establish a new architecture. So actually they used most of the buildings that was from the Qing dynasty. This is this is shoot in the direction of Beimen, and you can see that because the area is so huge, they have to ride bicycles in the park. Now you can see that this very retro bicycle is from Europe, but I tried to find this similar bicycle in Europe at the same period, but I didn't discover many. And in the end, I realized it was the secondhand or already like very old bicycles that is no longer used in Europe, and that's why they send it or they sell it to everywhere else around the world. This is the official temple of the Qing dynasty. These kind of official temples are built by the government. For example, in the south, there used to be a Tianhou temple, for example, Mazhu. Although it is a religious temple, but it's also associated with the government. So we know that ever since the old times, ever since the imperial times, all these temples are actually related to their government because it is subsidized by the government, and it is also used to hold some activities, official activities, religious activities of the government. We can see that these two temples now is divided by Chongqing South Road. When it's demolished, it's actually served different purpose, but a lot of things didn't change. For example, where Guanggong was, the hall becomes the official hall for military-related affairs. And we can see that this is what the official temple looks like now. This is the other temple. Wen Temple is actually the educational temple, and now it's also served for educational purpose. This is what it looks like now. So you can see it's a very vast area that serves educational purposes. We can see that all the temples, they are not really connected, but their location didn't change. It's just that their outside appearance and also the walls that used to connect them were demolished. We can see that in the ancient times, there are a lot of different temples that is established by a lot of local people to help them. It is to help to thank the blessings from the gods to help them cross the Taiwan Strait. So for the Hakka people, they will have San Kings, and for Hokkien, there are also different kind of clans. So in different places, there are a lot of different folklores and beliefs, and they worship different deities. So this has been passed down since the Qing dynasty, and they have started to organize temples since the Qing dynasty. This is what becomes the Bao'an Temple now. It serves commercial purposes, for example, tea and camphor exports. The location, this is another temple in Manga called Sanyi Temple. And there are a lot of big and small temples scattered around. And Longshan Temple worships the deity Guan Yin. So all these temples became a very famous tourist spots. This is another temple. And we know that they are from Zhangzhou, and it is a Zhangzhou worship deity. Most of them are populated in what we call New Taipei City now in Daxi, in the Daxi region. this is what it looks like now. So actually, some of these temples, they belongs to different groups, and sometimes they are not always in a very harmonious stance. They will maybe fight against each other or try to poison each other, things like that, because they belongs to different clans. But then they migrated many times because um, they start to take over some of the lands of the Taiwanese plants, indigenous people, and make it their own residence area. In Quanzhou, there is another group called the Anxi people. They live close to the mountains, and they do some kind of tea and also wood-related commercial activities. They don't reside near the streams. They reside close to the mountains. So these Anxi people, even until now, you can still see a lot of different buildings in Wenshan area, Shenkeng area, a lot of basins in Taipei that is close to the mountains. We can still see some of their ancient buildings. This is their temple. This is in Mongjia, and actually they worship 清水祖师. So you can see that in the temple, there are statues of the 祖师 of Qingshui. You can see that it is a Quanzhou Zhangzhou style building. This is in the colonial era during the Meiji Restoration period. You can see there are already a lot of very modern Japanese buildings that the style is influenced by the European countries, and we can see that this kind of designs is also becomes a new architectural design experiment in Taiwan. So this is what we call the telephone building during the Japanese colonial era, and we can see it near the government buildings and also some of the commercial blocks. So this is the function of this building is to connect different lines of the phones. Why do we have to emphasize the restoration spirit? It is because it's the first building in the Japanese colonial era that uses this kind of the new materials like the reinforced concrete. This is very new. Using the reinforced concrete is actually the first building that used this kind of materials. So it is very revolutionary. This is the first building that used the reinforced concrete to build the whole building. They didn't even do that in Japan. So, for example, to prevent the insects and the humid air from penetrating through the building, they use this kind of reinforced concrete on the floor or on the ceiling to prevent, for example, like rats from coming into the house. So these are some of the partial places they will use this kind of materials, but for the walls, they still use bricks and other materials, but this building is different. They try to use the reinforced concrete for the whole building. So after, you can see there is a new technique that's brought into the architectural industry, that use this new kind of materials instead of bricks or instead of wood. Why do they use this kind of material? Because the British people already started using this kind of new material. But because the cost is pretty high, relatively high compared to the other materials, so usually the Japanese government will not use this kind of material. But because of that time, the designer really wanted to, and the architect really wanted to use this new kind of materials and try. So that's why they started to put this new trial on the telephone buildings where there is not a lot of people inside, just telephone lines, like a warehouse. So it is less dangerous. So they can use this as an experiment to see if it's suitable for the buildings where it's used by people.
So in 1991, actually Japanese people started also use the steel reinforced concrete to build a building in Yokohama. And in around 1932, they found that the bricks and stone they used to build a building could not stand an earthquake. So they turned to steel reinforced concrete. So this building was built in that area, and it was demolished after the World War II, which was a pity. And then in the Japanese colonial era, the highest authority was the governor house, which is now served as our presidential office. Actually, it was an emblem. It was not built for housing purposes or for governance purposes. Many people will ask, how could we call it as a Renaissance period or Baroque era or other styles? In the early 20th centuries of Taiwan, actually the society background was not like what it was in Europe. So the architects at that time would refer to all kinds of architecturing style like neoclassic, neo-Gothic, or a little Baroque. So it's just like they extracted all kinds of elements from their textbooks and they just try to piece them together in a building. So that's why we could see all kinds of mixed building in the 19th centuries. You could see various elements. For example, there was a tower on this building. So we would say it is historicism. Some people would just would be confused because how did this tower work or function? But actually, it had no function. It was just an emblem. And it was also serving as a public communication purposes. So an editor of the magazine at that time called it a dumb tower because it served with no purposes. So if we say a dumb tower, we would know that the people were referring to the governor house because they could not just do their daily work in this house, and it seemed that the only function of the tower was for the eagles to build a nest there. So this is why the governor house was somewhat iconic at that time. And after Meiji Restoration, around the Taisho period, and also until the Showa period, we saw more and more buildings in historicism. For example, if we go to Dihua Street, we could still see a lot of historic buildings. We were lucky because the buildings were still very powerful, but if they didn't use the steel reinforced concrete when there was an earthquake, people may be harmed by the stones and rocks of the buildings. So in Taipei Basin, we could see more and more this kind of historic season buildings coming out. And this is the Monopoly Bureau. At first, they established a company called Taiwan Camphor Company. They expanded their business. They decided not to inhibit opium, but included these materials as their scope of business in the Monopoly Bureau. So the tobacco and liquor and camphor were circulated in the market before, but they all included these crops as their monopoly products, and it also served as a main source of income for the government. So that's why the Japanese government established this bureau to get some funds. And this is the headquarters office of this monopoly business. And now it became Taiwan Tobacco and Liquor Corporation, but it is 100% held by the public sector. The government still could gain some revenue from the selling of tobacco and liquor through this corporation. But since the outbreak of 228 event, it was also caused by the tobacco selling. The civil society didn't like what the Monopoly Bureau did, and they had a fight at that time. So they started to rebuild the system. So there was a Monopoly Bureau, and there was a factory in Nanmen area. For the factory, the National Taiwan Museum has re-established it as a park, and next to the buildings, there are some buildings that reflect the modern society. So it is different from the laws of the Qing dynasty, because now what the law presents is the court, and it was built around 1930 to 1940. Actually, it was firstly built by wood, but the wooden building was demolished, and they rebuilt it as it is right now. So many court-related personnel can go inside and work, but you can notice that it was a 3-story building and built by steel reinforced concrete. Actually, and also you can see a high tower in the middle, because the population was becoming huge. So you can see they add another layer to the building to accommodate more people. And this additional level was added after the World War II. The structure of the roof of the additional layer was different from the beneath building. The original building was made from steel reinforced concrete, but the upper part of the building was made from a steel frame. So they use lighter materials to add another level on the original building. And here's the construction department. Although it was a company, the president or the other staff was actually sent by the government. And after the World War II, Thai Power Corporation took over this department. It was just like the construction administration now, but now we have more laws and regulations governing the construction. But in the past, the construction department had to build houses themselves. They also had to make laws and enact laws. For example, the tunnels or airport or power station, they should take care of these large projects, but they should also be responsible for some small projects like the household base or foundations. So this construction department was later merged to the Governor General Office. And the original building was handed over to another electricity corporation for establishing other power generation for like 日月潭 in Nantou. In 1908, the steel reinforced concrete was not popular, but at that time, they used wood as most of the building materials. In North Taipei, when they suffered from air raid, the U.S. Army used a kind of bomb which would burn the roof. So you could see that there was huge damage to the building by the air raid of the U.S. Army. So they could not renovate the building. You can see in the farthest place there is the Governor General Office. After 10 few years, they started to use steel reinforced concrete. Although it was still damaged by air raid, it was just 30% of them, so they could more easily renovate the building. But for this one, it was not cost-effective if we renovated this one, so we just rebuilt it. And another building was the library, which was also burned by air raid. The house was actually served as ticketing. So when Japanese colonized Taiwan, their main purpose was to earn money. So they were considering different ways to get a revenue. So one of the approaches was to have some lottery business, but Japanese government did this lottery business for the first time, and they were kind of looking forward to it. They were hoping to earn money from the lottery business. Therefore, there was some corruption at that time. And this kind of lottery business in Taiwan also affected the economic status in Japan. Some people bribed the lottery companies, which led to public criticism in Japan because Japanese government would like to use some inappropriate acts to earn money in Taiwan. So you can see the management level at the corporation just had a lot of cooperation to do the lottery business, but they built this building for lottery business. But as they finished this operation, they didn't really run the lottery business in this building because there was a lot of criticism.
What were they doing after they built the lottery building? This was the where the official Taiwan Museum was during the colonial period. We can see that the official history is 1908, but actually this building is 1915. What about the gap? What about the gap in between the 7 years? Actually, everything was stored in this building. So this was originally planned to be a museum, but it's only used 7 years and then it was abolished. But during those 7 years, it was like the library of the Governor General of Taiwan. And it is also used to store all the official publications, for example, books and all the print materials like posters and other flyers. So you can see that at that time, this is a function of the museum. It served the purpose of the library of the Governor General office, Taiwan Governor General's office. And you can see that it looked like a stage, and surround the stage is different shelves. Why is it designed like this? Because originally they had the concept of designing this into like sort of like an entertainment place where lottery prize winner is announced, but at the end it didn't serve the purpose, so it becomes a library of the Taiwan Governor General's office. And during the war era, during the air bombing air raid era, the Japanese government knew that maybe this building will be destroyed by the bombing. So they started to moving all these different kind of books and posters into another safe place. Now all these kind of data and documents can be found in Yonghe Library. You can find all these old Japanese colonial period books and documents. And then luckily they did move the all these materials because it was indeed was bombed, suffered from the bombing during the wartime. So that is why until today we still have a lot of precious materials that is completely preserved, that is still intact until today, because all these books are preserved in a very safe place. The only thing that they didn't manage to preserve was the kids' books because they didn't have enough time. So you can see that this is the reconstruction of the original building. And also you can see this is the post office. It is the biggest post office, 3 stories. It was original 3 stories and now it's a 4-story building. And for a long period, the arc in the entrance was removed, but now it reconstructed what it used to like and restored the arc shape of the entrance. And then this is the Research Institute. This is what is now Zhongshan South Road. Near Ximending, Wanhua, there are a lot of dense streets and roads, and also a lot of shops and residents in the area. And in the old times, before the railway became underground near the Taipei main station, there it is a very busy transportation hub. So we can see that the location of this institute is very heavily armed. So usually people will not go near there. Even until now, it still has a similar atmosphere. Most people will not go close to this kind of area if they don't have a specific purpose. So in the old times, what they had in mind was they wanted a vast land that can be used to handle the most confidential and important matters and affairs. So they established this kind of research institute in this vast land, and to do research on, for example, the culture, the flora, the fauna, and the geology of Taiwan. So this is sort of like the back office of the research center. And this is to help the Japanese people who just arrived in Taiwan to get familiar with for example, the landscape, the culture, flora, fauna in Taiwan in a very short period of time. And then also during that era, Taiwan is slowly becoming a industrialized country. So it also experienced this kind of shift. This was the main office. This is where the Ministry of Education is now. So when the Taiwan government got it back, it's not just facing the Zhongshan South Road. It has a lot of different sides that face different roads. We can see there are a lot of entrance and a lot of building. And we can see the front part. The front part was reconstructed and changed into the Ministry of Education. So you can see the difference. The Ministry of Education was built first. And the architect is Wang Dahong. He also designed the presidential building in Taiwan. And we can see that there are a lot of lines, and also the shape of the window, and also the corners of the roof. A lot, and also you can see that under the roof there is a lot of the steel reinforced concrete that can remind us of the old times. So all these details are the designer's way of trying to preserve the old details. This is the state government. Okay, this is what is now the state government. During the Qing dynasty, it was where they did all the official work. And we can see it's situated in the crossroad of Kaifeng and Hankou Road. It was used until the 1915 and suffered from, for example, flooding and earthquakes. And then it became so the Taipei Room became what is now the Taihoku Prefecture. So we can see that after the 1925, all the administrative buildings has been reconstructed, and all these different buildings became what we call what become the headquarters of what we call the Taihoku Prefecture. And even until after the wars, a lot of central government officers or central government who moved here, they use this building as their working office. And so even until now, it is still being used, and it became a heritage building. This is what it looks like now. And opposite it, we can see what originally used to be its subsidiary administrative department. But then later, they started to establish different cities. Before the colonial period was over, there were 11 cities that were established. But before cities were established, the Taipei City Hall was actually under the Taihoku Prefecture building. But then afterward, when Taipei became the city, it needs to have its own working office. So that's why the City Hall was built on the opposite side of the Taihoku Prefecture. And then at first we can see that near there is an elementary school, and the elementary school, part of the elementary school was used for the government affairs, used as the government's office. If we take into consideration of the city hall when they just first arrived in Taiwan, we can see that all these people, because of the air raid, a lot of things were destroyed. So at first, it wasn't serve the function. It didn't serve the function of a city hall because the building was ruined, and because of this, the planning of the road was also influenced. And why is this building is here? This is how the Chinese migrants start to get to know about Taiwan. So the date is it is a period. So what about the elementary school that was already here? Well, they are moved to a different school. So we can see that after the colonial period was over, a lot of elementary school where the Japanese families' kids used to go to became the official buildings of the governments. Let's look at the museum under progress. You can see it was in the construction process, you can see that before it was not 3 stories, and of course this is what it looks now. We will look at some historic images. This is the Civic Center, and we can see that a lot of the buildings, the yamen, the government offices of the Qing dynasty were dismantled, were torn down. When the Japanese government was leaving Taiwan, actually their emotion is they have a mixed emotions because they feel that for the past decades, they have built and organized everything very well. So they hope that they could preserve these buildings so it can serve as an educational purpose. So the future students can learn about this period where when they used to call during the colonized era.
So I will always call it as the Taipei Museum of Fine Arts in the early stage. But when a new viceroy came, he thought that they would have to build a building to serve as the wedding ceremony for their emperor. So, as mentioned, in the 1920s, a lot of Japanese officials came and rebuilt a lot of buildings around Taipei. For example, in Sandao Temple and the garden around there, and we could not see any remains there. The only remains we can see is in the botanical garden for educational purposes as they preserve. In this picture, you can see the public auditorium in the Japanese colonial era. It is an witness evidence of the Japanese colonial era. After the World War II, it was the venue for the restoration of Taiwan for the celebration. This building was established in the later Japanese colonial era, but it was designated as a historic landmark very early because it also reflected the change of the rules. So this building, compared to National Taiwan Museum or other buildings, was built at a later stage, but as it was an emblem for the change of ruling, it was appointed as the historic landmark. In the Japanese colonial era, the difference between the primary school and junior high school was depending on the different background of the households. At that time, the official language was Japanese, and they would also set up a public school to teach both Chinese and Japanese for the Taiwanese people to get used to Japanese gradually. And if the family would like to send their kids to a whole Japanese environment, they can go to the primary school, but they had to go past an exam and be selected. So in the early times, there was the primary school and public school, but this Museum of Fine Arts in Chang'an West Road was formerly known as a primary school in the Japanese colonial era. So before they have built the headquarters office, they also worked in this primary school. The primary school was originally located in the intersection of Chang'an West Road. And this picture is also interesting because we can see that the election of the civil representative is very similar to what we are doing now. So you can see the banners in front of the entrance, and you can see who were going to run for representatives. And some primary schools were also used for a police station. Since the Japanese colonial era, they also migrated here with their families. So their kids would have to go to a higher education. They started to build a junior high school, and they also split the genders into different schools. So some kids chose to go back to Japan for further education, and some chose to go to China. And at the same time, the Japanese government started to set up some high schools. So you can see the men's senior high school here. It seems to be preserved quite intactly because during the air raid, the compartments and the windows were all ruined, but actually the inner space was preserved quite well. And the school tried very hard to preserve the entrance of the building. And the designated historic monument was just the front part of the school. So you could see the image of the Japanese colonial era. At the later stage in Showa period, you can see that the classical lines and some historicism disappeared. It is quite modern, and this high school is the affiliated senior high school of National Taiwan University now. So these were three men's senior high schools in the Japanese era. So the red bricks you just saw was built in the Japanese era, and now it becomes the Jianzhong High School, the first men's senior high school now. And here, the building built at a later stage didn't use red bricks. So the color was just like the tiles we have now, and they use these kind of materials to build the walls, and you can tell the era that the building was established from the building materials used. And also they built the senior high schools to the east. So first of all is the first men's senior high school, and then to the east is the second one, and then in the most eastern part is the third high school. The entrance of the senior high school was called the Old South Building, and it was a pity that people could not preserve that building after the World War II. But as the war began, they also had formed a space to restore Asia. At first, the Japanese government stayed in Taiwan, so they kind of worked with Taiwanese people. But during the World War II, they had to reverse their perception. So they had to fight against Europe and America. They wanted to restore the vibes of Asia. But we can see the architecture was still influenced by the styles from Europe and America. And this venue for restoration purpose was later used as a student center in the affiliated junior high school. But later it was demolished and became the famous South Building. And now you will not see it as a K-So because it is just a modern building. But we were still lucky because it was not fully removed. The parts removed, the parts that was not removed was the west building. And for this one, we felt lucky because the building was preserved almost fully, and now it is still undergoing the renovation. So this is the first girls senior high school, and also we could take a look at the location of the first, second, and third girls senior high school. The first men and girls senior high school were close to the administrative center, and then to the east is the second high school. And this building is also the girls senior high school, the first one. So in the Japanese colonial era, it was a 3-story building, and then it became the 4-story building. But later, the fourth level, the fourth floor was removed for the preservation of the cultural heritage. And now the population is getting less. So actually the school doesn't need so many floors to accommodate students. Then let's take a look at this photo. The girls' senior high school is like a building in European style. So after the World War II, the Legislative Yuan also stationed here. But where did all the students go? Actually, there was only 4% of Taiwanese teachers and students, and 96% of the Japanese teachers and students went back to Japan. But later on, there was actually the 4th girls' senior high school, and now it became a nursing school. So in urban planning, the building was still used for educational purposes, but there was a period where the Legislative Yuan went in to occupy the building for their work. So it was a kind of adjustment of the use of the buildings, and now you can see the red building still serves as the office for the Legislative Yuan, but in the back, it is the first girls' senior high school as we know. And then they still built some vocational schools. For example, this advanced business school. And now it became the business, politics, and law campus of National Taiwan University. When Taiwan has linked toward an industrialized society, they also need to cultivate relevant talents. So after the World War II, the industrial school in Tainan became the National University, and for Taipei, the industrial school became the Taipei University of Science and Technology. And you can see in this photo, the students were so funny and energetic. And actually, in this school, there was a red brick building. It is now serving as the history gallery of the university.
If you want to enter the university, you have to go to the preparatory school first. There are the 2-year and 3-year preparatory school. There's 2 different types. This is where the National Normal University used to be. So if you were able to get into the preparatory school, you will be it is a guarantee that you will be able to enter the Empire University. It is like a language school where you will learn some German and some Japanese. So you have to train your language skills first, and then also you need to have other training like philosophy and also religious related academics. So after the 2 or 3 years preparatory school, then you will have the chance to enter the university. And there were 2 schools, 2 imperial schools during this time. One of them is what is now Taiwan University, National Taiwan University. And all of the students you can see here, they are considered the elite of the society. And we can see that they have this certain kind of image they want to hold. For example, they will be wearing uniforms. And then you can see that their uniform, they use a uniform top as a jacket, and they will actually reveal their underwear. And instead of wearing sneakers, they will have wear the Japanese style sandals. Why? Because the clogs will make a lot of noise when you walk. So then you will grab everyone's attention. And also anyway, at the school, they try not to look like a goody two shoe, because if you wear the uniform properly and if you look like like a really goody, then maybe you will probably be bullied at school. This is actually true stories that we got from people who used to go to the preparatory school. And this is the library, the literary building department. This is one of the earliest buildings that was established in the university, and it became the heritage buildings in Taiwan. For example, including its entrance. This is the public hospital. It is a very large-scale construction plan, not only as a hospital, but also a research center at that time. We know that there is a hierarchy in the society at that time during the Meiji era, during the Meiji period. And during that time, they still have a kind of superiority. So all the doctors who were able to be the doctors at this public hospital, you have to from Japan, and they are not willing to use the doctors that is trained in Taiwan. What about Taiwanese people? Where do they go to hospitals? Actually, right opposite this public hospital is a hospital established by the Red Cross. That's where the Taiwanese people go to see the doctors. So it's a very big difference. This building is actually used to establish established before at the colonial period and for the Japanese people. And this is also work as a for the Japanese people to train them to become residence doctors before they go back to their hometown and open up their own clinic. They have a lot of, for example, VIP room and reception room, and also the dean's office. You can see a lot of chandeliers and a lot of very exquisitely carved walls and cupboards in the hospital. And it has been continued used after the war. We can see that when constructing a building, they will have a balcony on the south side. This is very typical of a Japanese building. We can see that since we are in the southern hemisphere, the angle of sunshine is different. So if you don't design a balcony in the south, the sun will penetrate directly through the building into the indoors. So we can see that in a lot of buildings, they use this balcony as kind of a bridge to bridge the outdoors and indoors, so the sunshine don't directly get into the indoors. But slowly after the wars, because of the prevalence of air conditioning, they no longer need this kind of balcony design because without air conditioning, they don't need to regulate the temperature that much. But the Taiwan hospital's balcony was preserved. But in the earlier times, before the public hospital, actually in Taiwan, there already exists this kind of Christian hospital that was established by the Europeans, the churches, for example, the Catholics church. And also, you can see these kind of different Christian hospitals that is scattered in Taiwan during that time. And actually, they existed long before the public hospital. So if we can see, this is the Makai Memorial Hospital, the headquarters. If you've ever been to the Shuanglian station, you will see all these kind of installments that surrounds the Makai Memorial Hospital. Why? Because it is sort of like paying tribute to the Christian hospital in the old times. We can see that the building style is very similar to the mansions in Danshui area. You can see that there are a lot of balconies and corridors with these arch-shaped openings. And there are a lot of tiles on the building as well. So all these are the special features of the Christian hospital, and a lot of architects for these Christian hospitals, they later became the consultant of the Taiwan Governor General's office because they know where to source all these different kind of construction materials. And also, they realized that in the end, that even Taiwan is a subtropical, um, is situated in the subtropical region. Sometimes during the winter, it can be very cold, and a fireplace is also required. So, actually, a fireplace is like a gathering spot where people will gather together and to watch important, for example, news or is listen to important broadcasts. So we can see that there are chimneys in these buildings because that's because there are fireplaces in these buildings as well. Besides the fireplace, there are also boilers in some of these hospital buildings, to for water and to wash the towels, etc. And this is the kind of buildings that with these very thick columns. I think a lot of people is very familiar with these buildings. If you're interested, you can go and have a look, check out the dinosaurs that's on exhibit there, and you can see that the columns started from the second story to the fourth story. This is a very special. This is a very special style that is inspired by the sanctuaries in the ancient times, and it means that why do you have this kind of column in this bank? Because I want to send out the idea that if you have these columns, it means that your money are protected by the deity, like in the sanctuary. So that's why they designed these special columns for these bank buildings. There are some architects that at that time that specifies in this kind of bank buildings, and it also these kind of architect also later became the consultant of the Taiwan Governor General's office. Even though at that time the currency is the same, but Taiwan has its own currency at that time in the bank. And this is the hotel that we mentioned earlier, the Railway Hotel. It was established very early after 1908 when the railway was established and started operating. It is run by the railway department. When it was established in 1908, it was still mainly a wooden, use mostly wooden materials. But you can see after the air raid, a lot of things were burned down, and a lot of things were destroyed, so it was torn. We can see that it is what we saw where the entrance located was the Guanqian Road. Now it is facing the west. It's quite different from the other buildings, which usually faces the south. Besides hotels, you can see that a lot of there are, because Japanese people really enjoys hot springs, so we will see these kind of different buildings that's dedicated to this kind of like taking a public bath, like hot springs. And it was this building was established on a public land, so it's a public bath area where the public can go enjoy the hot springs. And after now, it is now restored and become one of the core preservation site of the Beito Museum. In the old times, there are three official marketplaces where you can go and trade with other people, whether you are a fisherman or where you are a butcher. In the old times, you have to leave very early in the morning, and then you start to do the trade. But what about when you leave all the mess? Who needs to clean up the mess? For example, there will be a lot of waste. There will be a lot of garbage. But in the old times, there were no uh, office or no units that's designated to clean this kind of or solve this kind of environmental problem. So that is why this kind of official marketplace was developed so that they can collect all the waste and all the garbage after the trade was over. And also they separated the vendors for vegetables and for meats and seafood. And also before you want to use that booth, you have to pay first. You have to pay deposit and you have to pay rent. This is to guarantee that everyone will be responsible for keeping the environment clean. This is also the former Yongle market. And then after it's established, all the commercial streets are or went there to see the example and to bring it back to their regions so that all the market can look the same.
So our building. So it will kind of create a relaxing sense for entertainment, and the architect also set a lot of building here in the Japanese era. And now it is how the theater looks like. It's just outside of the exit six of the Shimen station. So whether it's the corporation owners or the civil administrator, they needed to find their funds and also recruit famous architects to build their own office buildings. So the construction department started to decide that they need to develop an official building system. So whether they are the viceroy or the chief civil administrator or other officials, actually you can see the traces from the past time to now, to the current system. So these official buildings have different types. Some of them are a whole building, one building, and some of them are just like 3 stories, or some are 6 doorways connected together, and we will call them as the Japanese dorm together. For the Japanese government, they didn't necessarily use the Japanese style architect techniques to build the houses. You can see the standard format wooden house was also influenced by the techniques during the Meiji Restoration period. Especially, we will see a lot of horizontal wood plates to form the wall. We will call them as a kind of rainfall plate. Actually, it was introduced from the America, and they actually hired some specialists who had the experience in developing the western part of the US. They came to Taiwan and built this kind of Japanese style dorm. In addition to the wooden official house, this is the Western style residence for the viceroy. In Taiwan, you can find many of these kind of buildings. In the early times, they were used to host like royals or high-level officials. But actually, the prefecture leaders did not live there either. But if the royal family from Japan came to Taiwan, they would use this kind of residence or mansion to host them, to receive them. So they needed to stay at a mansion which was similar to their houses back in their home country in Japan. So in fact, the viceroy just stayed in another wooden residence beside the mansion. So to be honest, it just looked quite magnificent. And if they hosted the royal family here, even if there wasn't a feast or a dancing party, they could always relax here. So you will find that the building wasn't symmetrical, and close to Zhongshan South Road, there was a high tower. When the high-level officials came to Taiwan from Japan, the tower could serve as a a demo tower. So the officials would stand at the tower and wave to them to show how well they governed this place. So we seem to have 6 minutes left, but I felt that it isn't enough for me to conclude the Japanese colonial era. So let me just skip some photos and we come to the society after the World War II. You can see the Taipei city was expanded from the west to the east. We just touch on a lot of buildings and churches, train stations, which were developed under the industrial period, and also some factories. So this is probably the end of the Japanese colonial era. Let's look at some photos after the World War II, which would reflect the politic or economic demands. So you will see that the city roads or the building were just like a rectangular shape. But for some museums, universities, or government agencies, they are still given the impression of a new era. So they will use an old-fashioned style of Chinese culture, which was like a palace. And also the National History Museum beside that building was also designed in a Chinese style. They used the green tiles on the outer side and use steel reinforced concrete inside. And over time, these buildings were transformed into different functionalities. And also here's the Yuanshan Hotel, which really inherited the images of Chinese traditions. So there was kind of a conflict, which was really intriguing. When the national government came, whether it was the reformatory groups or the religious groups, they would like to overthrow the Qing dynasty. They would just want to differentiate themselves with the Chinese government. So when they came to Taiwan, they would like to emphasize that they were the former heir of the Chinese tradition. But actually, their concept of the traditions was still influenced by the Qing dynasty. So that's why we will see a lot of buildings and houses like theaters or musical venues were very looking alike the buildings in Beijing. Here, you can see how the democracy worked. They came here to elect the president. So this is the Zhongshan Hole in Yangming Mountain. In the past few years, it really snowed and it looked very much like the buildings in China. And you can also see that the government printed all of the iconic buildings at the back of our notes. And this one is a temple for the revolution. And then the Sun Yat-sen Memorial Hall also resembled the castle in China. And then when the city was expanding to the east, the urban planning was adjusted a bit. And then here you can see the marketplace, the museums of fine art, whether it's the Western historicism or the old-fashioned palace from China. Anything from the past just vanished. For the modern society, the buildings would have to serve as a function, and it's rectangular or square. It's just like building blocks. And then this is a Makai Memorial Hospital. And you can see the households left in the city were also under the process of transformation and reconstruction. This is in Donghua South Road. It's an old mansion of Anxi people. But after a huge debate from the Conservative Party and the Progressive Party, they decided to demolish the ruins and relocate them to another area. And this is the Zhongxiao East Road. You could see the uh, the memorial hall in the farthest area. But actually, our impression to Taipei now is really different from it was in the 1980s. There was a long time when the architects who went abroad for further study uh, thought that they needed to use a white building to reflect the space and the society and the culture. So they started to put in a lot of white wall building. But after that, they found that the air pollution in Taipei would just ruin the appearance of the buildings. So you could see the image here. There are a lot of like air conditioning hanging outside or some other equipment hanging on the building, which really blocked the overall appearance of the buildings. And then over time, the architects started uh, to use another idea to develop the buildings instead of only white appearance. So this is the end of my presentation. So anyone has any questions, we can open the floor for 2 questions. Or uh, if anyone wants to comment. Or because this presentation it's really informative and you need to uh, like sort out the information yourselves. But actually, we will keep the video of this presentation on our official channel on YouTube. And for the students of the International Docent Training Program, you can also refer to the English version of the presentation done by the interpreters. Actually, I found that the views was quite high. There were about 35 people in the morning watching live. Or anyone wants to share your thoughts about the tourist attractions related to culture and histories? Do you have any impressive stories that you learned from the speaker? I have a question. If we want to introduce the Taipei city to a foreigner, what's the most impressive points that you think that we can bring up to them?
Okay, I think a lot of I don't know if you understand the concept that the image is more memorable. And I'm not sure that if you know that 101 is um, when you think about 101, the image is very vivid, even though it was only built 20 years ago. But a lot of people know about this. This is the most famous buildings. Um, but actually, there are also a lot of historical buildings that is from the Qing Dynasty or that is built during the colonial period. Um, but why is only Taipei 101 memorable? So if it depends on how long your foreign friends want to stay. If he only has an hour in Taiwan, then of course I would suggest go to Taipei 101. Not about the building itself, but because at that height, it is easier for you to tell them very clearly about where the different location is. Because you're at a high place, you have an aerial view. So you can quickly introduce the whole city to them. If they have half day, it depends on where they are from. If they are from Japan, then they probably would r- like to go to the Qingtian area because there are a lot of tea houses that was built during the Japanese colonial era. So if they visit there, they might have. It's better for them to reimagine what it was like during that period. And also, there are a lot of museums that was restored after the colonial period. And when this is also the museum I would suggest that you should take them to. If they are from the US or the Europe, I think it's not really that important to show them the cultural or the historical sites, but um, the biggest difference is food. So I would suggest that you take them to taste all the delight, street delight. Okay, if there is no further question, then I will tell. I want to ask you at the 228 park. That's is there any scenic spot you would suggest or recommend? Before, I used to enjoy walking on Chongqing South Road during lunchtime. Why? Because I think the elite bookstore there, is very different. Because I know that now that at the elite building, for example, in the Xinyi area, it is very trendy and um, it shows the more modern and more trendy stuff in bookstores like Elite bookstore. But on the bookstore in Chongqing South Road, it's very different. It's still a very old style, and it sort of kind has this retro feel. It has some unique bookstores, independent bookstores. Um, so for me, it's very special. And also, there are a lot of hidden bookshops in the buildings or in the alleys. They don't even have a label, but when you enter, you will find a whole different world, a new world. And it has a very retro feel. And the interior design is also very exquisite and beautiful. So for me, this is very magical. And this is the things I enjoy. I like to do during my free time. Um, mm, so I think for me, this is what I want to do. But it has to do with my personal interest and my personality. And I think this kind of unique commercial spot is very interesting and attractive for me. Okay, we have another question here. I think that in the recent 10 years, a lot of buildings in Taipei, because you mentioned a lot of buildings that reflect the cultures of different periods. What about the buildings in the recent 10 years? What do you think it's trying to reflect? And or how can you compare with the modern Western countries or modern Japan country? For example, the Taichung Opera House, or like the other very distinguished buildings or historical distinguished new buildings in Taiwan. Well, for the performance spaces, it is a very uh, distinctive landmark. For example, if you have to hold a ceremony, a special ceremony, then you have to um, hold it in this kind of different hold in this kind of special locations. And for example, the exhibition Nude Blanche, it was also um, held in a very in different significant buildings because of its significance or the message it's trying to convey. So, recent years, no matter whether you're educational buildings or you are a medical building or whatever, it actually reflects the international message. So, for example, if you want to do interior decoration or you want to move into a new apartment, when you look online, there are all kinds of different styles and information, and it's actually doesn't just reflect one single place. It's actually combine different international concepts. After the 921 earthquake, the buildings and the construction that's in Taiwan has become really different because people are aware of the harm that earthquake can bring. So when we observe the past 10 or 20 years, if we look at the school construction structure, we can understand that it is very different from the school structure in the old times. Why? Because after the natural disaster, we can better understand what kind of building, what kind of construction is more fit for the modern society. So actually, the spirit is the same, but the function and the appearance is different. It's very hard to express in a few words or in a few sentences, but there is a kind of a logic here, and I think every country try to make the maximum use of the resources you have in your own country to build any style building you want as long as it fits the regulations. 这是一个开放式的问题，我想问一下，就是都市规划对于台北的一些河流还有道路有什么影响？因为我是来自波士顿，那我认为，比如说像一些什么水灾等等的这些天灾人祸，是不是跟都市规划是有关的呢？就是如果我们去跟其他的城市相比，例如说像是高雄的爱河，然后或是等等的这个其他这个土地都市规划是不是会影响？It is from Boston in the U.S. and in his opinion or travel experience, he feels that the stream in Taiwan, the environment is very close to the city. So he is wondering, is it related to our recent urban planning? So this is something he would like to know. He's curious. This is what we have been mentioned for a very long time. Is we try to incorporate more streams and more rivers or more natural states into the urban scenario. So the presidential building now is actually facing east. Why? Because in the future, um, we have an idea that the cities they are trying to run, it will be facing them from the east side. No matter it's in Kaohsiung or in Boston or any other major cities in um, the countries, whether it's in Rome or in Florence, if you look at the planning of the streams in the urban areas, this is something you have to take into consideration. But then you have to consider about the cost because you have to see if you do the reconstruction, whether it will cause flooding in the future.
So even into the Japanese colonial era, when we have the fifth or sixth viceroy, they were started to decide how they could govern Taiwan, because in the previous viceroys eras, they were still thinking about how they could sell Taiwan because they didn't know how to earn the money from Taiwan. And for the third viceroy said that they got a new land, and it was just like they didn't raise a horse in their daily lives, but they suddenly was given a house, a horse stand, a horse farm, and they didn't know how to raise the horse. It was just like the colonization of Taiwan. So they just didn't try hard to reorganize the rivers along the city. So as we can see from the images, the national government would extend from the Japanese organization when the new Taipei city was actually known formally as Taipei County. They tried to set an embankment along the rivers and to surround the city town. But when the river flooded, they would just try to connect the water to other suburban areas like Sanchong and Luzhou. But when people came to Taipei Basin to settle, they needed to try to sustain the living here. When people in Taipei City could not afford the house or the living cost, they would just move to the new Taipei City. And the local government actually had different ways to govern the areas, because Taipei City and New Taipei City had different parties to governing. But now you can see that they were also competing against each other. For example, you have a 10-meter embankment, then I will need a 12-meter embankment, and so on. So when you watch like Japanese drama or European American dramas, you will also see a different styles of culture and society or buildings. So in Taipei, the big Taipei area is just two parts. So when we recommend others having some delicacies in Taipei or New Taipei City, we seldom take them to Dadaocheng or the embankment area, because there it was nothing to visit, because the Japanese government just abandoned that area. But Kaohsiung is different, because the local government in Kaohsiung attempted to connect city and river. So when they try to design the urban planning, they would try to consider the riverside, and it is just totally different from Taipei. And there is also a green river planning. So in recent years, the government tried to adopt a kind of green urban planning approaches to regulate the river and the flow. And it is kind of a pity that the local government didn't really sort out how to solve the problems of the sediment at the ditches in Taipei City. For example, in Xinsheng South Road, the sewage system there could actually be organized well, but it is inevitable that it will influence the traffic. So the mayors all over the time didn't really dare to organize that rivers and areas. I think the questions are really interesting, and we need more time to delve into the background. In conclusion, I would like to share with all of you when we prepare this walking tour for foreign visitors, actually we start from the structure given by Tsung-kuei, the lecturer. Actually, he also gave a speech in 3 hours, and we were considering that when we need to give a walking tour in English, and actually we cannot really convey all of the meaning of a 3 hour speech in English. We may need 5 or 6 hours. So how can we let all of the foreign visitors know our history and culture? So this is why we need to sort out and organize our database and try to extract the essence of the cultural and history, so that all of the students and docents can choose to share something related to your own background or related to the current affairs that you focus on. So actually there's a kind of flexibility in walking tour. So whether it's the student on site or the audience online, I hope that in the future, if you would like to take your foreign friends around Taipei, you can refer to the resources provided by the National Taiwan Museum. So thank you again for the speakers sharing.